Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast, episode 56.
Welcome to the Out of Order Podcast, your window into the firearms community, exploring those shaping the future of our rights and protecting our lifestyle, laws, legal cases, activism, and self-defense, in a candid and honest podcast for our brothers and sisters in arms. Here's your host, James Kalita.
Thanks for tuning in to episode 56 of the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. Show notes for this page will be at outoforderjameskalita.com/56. Sponsored for today's episode is the Out of Order Gun Rights Podcast. We've put together a new program for Patreon supporters. Supporters contributing $5 or more per month get exclusive access to our members-only Facebook page, Facebook group, and a personalized thank you on the show. Also want to ask you guys, whatever format you're listening to this in, whether you're downloading it on iTunes, Stitcher, the new Google Podcast app, if you're watching it on YouTube, please give a review. A 5-star review would be wonderful. And we're trying to reach 1 million listeners, and every review helps us come up a little bit higher in the search and recommendation results on the podcatchers. Today's guest is Kim Stolfer. He is president of Firearms Owners Against Crime. And now, here's Kim.
Kim Stolfer, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, James. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you. So, Kim, you are the president and one of the co-founders of Firearm Owners Against Crime. Would you tell us a little bit about that group?
Well, in the state of Pennsylvania, we have had a tumultuous relationship with the legislature and protecting rights. And in the early 90s, there were many attacks on various dimensions of the right to bear arms. And we watched how these issues unfolded, and we decided that there were the aspects of politics is that you either help get these politicians elected or you remove them from office as one of the dimensions of a well-rounded activist effort. And we didn't feel that enough was being done to elect the right people to office. And so we felt that we could educate the candidates, and we could also use that education to either help or hurt those in office who lose touch with the fact of what their obligations and oath is. So we formed in late 1993 when the city of Philadelphia and city of Pittsburgh sought to ban so-called assault weapons. And during that period of time, we formalized our relationship with the state into a registered state political action committee. We are nonpartisan, and we have a sole focus in protecting not only the right to bear arms, but all civil rights embodied within the United States as well as the state constitution.
And so I read too that you helped author specific pieces of legislation.
I have. Over the years, just shortly after Firearms Owners Against Crime was organized, we ran into a situation where it's something interesting that many of your listeners are not going to be fully aware of, that, and it's an old euphemism for us because politics, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, we look at this as two heads of the same snake. And why do we look at it like this? Because you can go to different parts of the country, and the Democrats are more protective of rights, and in other parts it's the Republicans. And in our experience, what we want to do is we want to get as many of the good people elected as we can, and in doing that, that also helps us during the time when the legislation comes up, like as it did in 1994 and 95, called Act 17. Here in Pennsylvania, that was called Special Session House Bill 110, which, when signed by the governor, became Act 17, and it was a complete rewrite of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act. It was signed by a governor who was a Republican, Tom Ridge, here in Pennsylvania. And it was an absolute disaster as far as rights go. The way the law was written, the first go-round of it, you had to carry the evidence, proof of sale, proof of lawful purchase with you and produce it upon demand of a law enforcement officer. There were a host of problems. And over the course of the next 3 years, we wrote 3 different packages of law, and I was deeply involved in that, writing many of the sections that it will sound kind of bizarre, but the original bill, which was Special Session House Bill 110, was 37 pages. And since then, there have been, in that succeeding 3 years, there were 4 packages of changes to it, amounting to nearly 160 pages of legislation that had to be approved to correct the problems in the first bill. And so from that point moving forward, we have been involved in every single campaign for and against guns and defending the right to bear arms. In 2002, for instance, we began the campaign with the Castle Doctrine, which was something that was considered to be quite controversial at the time. I wrote the bill and presented it to Representative Steve Capelli, and over the years we pushed and continued to push and refine the bill until it was finally passed and signed into law in 2010. It was 8 years of hard work, and along the way we went through the Governor Ed Rendell administration. We had a whole flurry of anti-gun bills from him. We had the preemption law come up. We still have preemption law problems in Pennsylvania, where our 1974 preemption law was passed to stop communities from creating a patchwork quilt of laws, and yet we have local communities that continue to thumb their nose at the Constitution and even at the criminal law that's supposed to hold them accountable if they don't listen. To our count, there's nearly 300 communities that have violations of Pennsylvania preemption law, and we're slowly trying to change that. We've had legislation overturned in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It was clearly a political decision. It was not a constitutional or judicial decision where it was appropriate, what was appropriate under the law. And we've defeated countless numbers of bills. Routinely, Pennsylvania sees in the House and the Senate anywhere from 40 to 50 anti-gun bills every session in the House, and nearly the same in the Senate. And it has been an effort that was pretty much focused on and worked on by volunteers throughout Pennsylvania. There's a lot of good people that work very hard at this, and we're always seeking to get more gun owners involved, because we believe the real answer here is an informed electorate as well as a very active and vibrant citizenry unwilling to sacrifice freedoms to play political games and allow legislators to take advantage of this for their own re-election efforts.
And Pennsylvania, and I guess I've talked about how the Constitution isn't self-enforcing with some of my other guests, but Pennsylvania has a really strong protection, written into its Constitution, and we still see more and more, gun laws proposed and passed. Do you have any insights as to where the shift came in, or why that keeps happening?
Well, I believe that this occurred after the 1968 statewide constitutional convention we had, because the impact of a constitutional convention, much like they're trying to push on the federal level now, is really misunderstood. And what it did was it basically drew a line and said all case law, all relevant case law on things like the Constitution are pretty much set aside. They're only for comment. They're not for binding effect on government. So when 1968 came along and we had the Constitutional Convention, while they didn't change the text of Article 1, Section 21 in Pennsylvania's Constitution, what it did was take all the judicial cases that had protected it and set them aside And from 1968 until roughly 1982, there was a flurry of decision in the Supreme Court which watered down the restrictions on government from passing new laws. It, for all intents and purposes, it conveyed the message that if government had a compelling interest, which is a very nebulous term, had a compelling interest in restricting constitutional rights, then the court would consider it. And so we have been fighting with that, and that's one of the reasons why they passed the preemption law in 1974, because there were so many laws proposed, not only at the statewide level here in PA, but at the local municipal level, that it was almost like an avalanche of laws, and the state wanted to reserve that power to themselves, and that in and of itself is a constitutional insult, because by saying that the state has the power to violate the rights embodied under the Constitution is directly in contravention to Article 1, Section 21, which says the right of the Pennsylvania citizen to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state shall not be questioned. And most people don't look any further than that, but Section 25 in that same Article 1 says, and I'm going to paraphrase, that all the rights embodied under Article 1 shall forever remain inviolate. And yet, from 1995, when they passed, from 1931 until 1995, we had a total of 50 pages of gun laws in Pennsylvania. Beginning in 1995, when the Act 17 was signed into place till now, the publication Laws Relating to Guns in Pennsylvania, there is 148 pages of laws governing the right to bear arms and transport and a variety of things. So the growth of laws has not been attenuated by the Constitution, which our founding fathers intended to be protective and a limitation on government authority. So the concepts, and I would note that there is a parallel to what they've done at the federal level in the legal community, because in the mid-70s, 1976, I believe, was when the scrutiny levels came in for examining rights at the federal level. And what that means is there's the most protective one is called strict scrutiny, which is basically, for your listeners, the words in the Bill of Rights, whether it's Second Amendment for the federal Constitution or the First Amendment, whatever, they're supposed to mean what they say, and that governments can't touch it and violate it except in extreme circumstances. Well, the next level down is called intermediate scrutiny, and that's where compelling government interest came in. And I like to tell legislators and the public, our view is that compelling government interest means that the very government that has no duty under the Constitution to protect citizens, and the very same government who is seeking at that same time to limit the rights of citizens while not burdening themselves with the responsibility to protect the very citizens are disarming. So it makes absolutely no logical, ethical, or moral sense for them to take this position to water down the rights that our founding fathers knew was going to be the most important thing for our nation to protect over the centuries. And that's why the Constitution was a timeless document. And that's why some who want to see a conference of the states to change the federal Constitution, that's one of the things that they don't really fully comprehend, the impact of that, not only in the courts, but also on everyday citizens' lives.
And in addition to laws, you have the governor right now, an attorney general working against you. Did you want to talk about what just happened with distributed defense and the PA governor?
Sure. For you listeners that haven't been following this, for the last 5 years, there's been a long, winding court case from an issue that was brought up by Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed, and that involves the utilization of new technology, which is basically computer-assisted design and manufacture of parts. Whereas now these metal printers, these printers that you can print out plastic and metal parts using a computer program, much like you do for one of the common Word programs or whatever on your computer, you can actually print devices. As an example, Elon Musk in his SpaceX, the rocket motors in those rockets are all metal. They use metal printers to print the parts. And so Cody Wilson put together an organization and a business called Defense Distributed, and as he did that specifically to push the envelope and show that this technology could be used to manufacture firearms. His first firearm was a plastic one. And so what the Department of Justice had done was they said that the sharing of these files, these defense distributed manufacturing computer files that would allow you to print your own firearms was not legal, and they shut him down from doing that. Well, he sued, and over the course of these years, it finally made its way to court, and the Department of Justice lost the lawsuit. And damages were awarded to Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed, and this coming Wednesday was going to be the formal announcement that these files were now going to be available to any American citizen so that they could print their own firearms. And higher quality metal printers, where you can use metal materials to print certain metals to print a metal firearm, or anything really metal that go through the printer at whatever size, they roughly run about $3,000 and up for the printer. And before I go any further, I just want to make sure your listeners understand. Making your own firearm is recognized right now by the federal government. You can make your own firearm for yourself, and it's legal. You cannot sell it. You can't give it to someone, because then you're transacting in the firearm. You manufactured it, and that's illegal. But to make a firearm for yourself is legal under federal law. Now, what's going on now is, because this is so easy to do, and so taking so much advantage of new technology, that the powers that be in Harrisburg, the Governor Wolf, Attorney General Shapiro, and the Pennsylvania State Police had an emergency meeting over the weekend. And in that meeting, they evidently communicated with Defense Distributed, and they now have put a ban in place for the sharing of these files with Pennsylvania citizens. And so not only is it ludicrous for this, because it flies in the face of common sense, because we all know what it's like if you have a computer, how easy it is to share a file from one computer to another. And it's very simple for any individual to share a file from another state. So this is nothing more than political pandering for politicians to try to drive a wedge into an issue and keep the public in fear of the sky is falling mentality. Frankly, I have a mental image of the Governor Wolf and Attorney General Shapiro with tinfoil hats on, because they're so fearful of the average citizen and rights, that they're willing to just evangelize on this issue with no common sense nor any concern. Maybe they do have a concern, but I'm going to guess that they don't see the bigger picture, because this is a violation of the First Amendment, this is a violation of the Second Amendment, and it's a violation of something equally as strong, and that's called the separation of powers. Because the governor and the attorney general cannot make policy. That's the legislature's role. And by doing this, they have usurped the legislature's power and authority. And that is the most dangerous thing that's about all of this, is they've flaunted the amendments, which is what, by the way, the Department of Justice already lost, and they're forcing citizens to try and take them to court and to pony up the money to do that, because it's going to have to go to federal court. And at the same time, they've created created an anomaly that could end up being a huge problem down the road. So I think anybody that's concerned about the First Amendment or about individual liberties should take serious umbrage with what the governor and the attorney general has done, because overstepping their authority in this way is nothing more than a burning of books that you saw Adolf Hitler do. And I believe that it is extremely unseemly in a constitutional republic, which is what America is.
Absolutely. And so what can people do to help you and your cause?
Well, our website is www.foac-pac.org. Again, that's www.foac-pac.org. And if they could go there and use the materials we have up there, because we created that in the eyes of helping every citizen be able to see what these issues are about and to provide them with the materials to defend them. So if they could go to our website, if they want to join, we would be very appreciative of their membership in our organization. It's $20 a year. And at the same time, if you want to donate to a specific cause, like, for instance, the legal action we're considering in this regard, they can donate to that. And we would also ask them to take these materials and become basically citizen warriors, if you will, to use these materials to go out and educate their friends. Because citizens that are aware of these issues should become ambassadors themselves of trying to reach out and get more of their fellow citizens involved. If they have a need for someone to come and put on a presentation, we can make arrangements for that to talk about these issues. We're looking for solid grassroots activists who want to change things, and they don't want the constant flurry of donate to us because we know better type of attitude. We don't do that. Our goal is to basically create self-guiding missiles of freedom out of every citizen who wants to make a difference. And if you do, then we're the organization for you, because we believe all citizens have a right under the Constitution to bear arms and defend themselves and to, if necessary, stop a tyrannical government from forming. And that's the real true purpose of the Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 21, in keeping government in check should it get out of hand.
Thank you. And Kim, I always ask my guests if there are books that they recommend all gun owners read. Any come to mind?
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely. For instance, there's a new book by Stephen Halbrook called Gun Control in Nazi-Occupied France. That one just came out. That's an excellent book. If want another one, I would say that Dr. Joyce Lee Malcolm wrote a book called The Origins of an Anglo-American Right to Keep and Bear Arms. That's back in print. That's another outstanding book. Dr. John Lott has a book out that's in its third generation, and it's called More Guns, Less Crime. If you want to see a complete disassembling of the gun control argument, you can't do much better than going and reading that book. And I would say one of the ones that's going to be most telling, I think, is from David Hardy, in addition to the ones I just mentioned. And it's called I'm From the Government, and I'm Here to Kill You. And it's a true human cost of official negligence and how it impacts the average citizens. And it uses actual real events to basically describe and show why laws, in many ways, do not protect you. They're harmful. And if your listeners want another book, I'll close with this one. We all know about the mass shootings we've had, but what we don't know many times is what's behind them, the failures of government, the failures of laws, the failures of the courts to enforce them, and also does the media have any role in this? And psychologically speaking, one of our board members for the organization is Dr. Charles Gallo. And he talks about this all the time when we're at meetings. But there's a book out called The Copycat Effect. And it talks about how naming the killers in these mass murders actually creates a desire, a willingness to do more of these. And they come in groups of threes. And this is a psychological manifestation of a common thread throughout all of these. So if you want to read about why we should be changing in the way we turn these crazy killers into martyrs, the Copycat Effect book is one you really should read.
Excellent. I will post those on the show notes page. And Kim, I thank you very much for being on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I thank you for inviting me.
I look forward to talking to you again soon.
As do I, James.
Thanks again for tuning in to episode 56 of the Out of Order Gun Rights podcast. Head over to the show notes page, outoforderjameskalita.com/56, and you will find links to the books Kim mentioned, to Firearms Owners Against Crime. And as you guys know, I saved this last ad spot for nonprofit and grassroots organizations that help the Second Amendment and teach people to shoot. Obviously, today I'm going to ask you guys to go and visit Kim's website, Firearms Owners Against Crime, and you'll find a link to that on the show notes page. It's Out of Order, James Kalita. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.